Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Coller here, and joining me on the show, ESPN's Kevin Seifert. Kevin, we've got an exciting couple of weeks on the way here of Vikings football where, let me just take a look at their roster. Oh yeah, there's not a lot of people on it.
Yeah. I was just telling somebody, like somebody asked, like one of my bosses in Bristol asked us, do you think it's going to be a busy offseason free agency wise? And I'm like, it's just the math tells you it's going to be busy. Like, I don't know if that means high profile, low profile, mixture of what, but just the math to get to the roster limit of 90 is going to be pretty significant.
That UDFA market is going to be really
Huge.
hot after the draft for this team.
Yeah.
So I got a lot to ask you, but I think the best place to start is with Sam Darnold and the franchise tag. The tag window is open, and I have been talking about this as if I don't know how you don't tag him, because there has to be teams that want to trade for Sam Darnold. And I also see other folks saying, no, it doesn't make a lot of sense to tag him. So where do we stand on that? And the transition tag is another potential option here.
Yeah.
What's your feeling on the tag?
I think right now, everything, they're just kind of sitting tight. And I think the next step will be to determine if a trade market would materialize. And that's tough to do right now. But it only takes a couple of teams that really hope that they can get him signed in free agency to create a market that would make you franchise him and then tag him, even if it's just to get one draft pick. Like I was looking back at the Matt Castle trade in 2009 when the Patriots tagged Matt Castle and as a quarterback and sent him to the Chiefs. I think it was for a second round pick, but they also included Mike Vrabel in that trade. So it was Vrabel and Castle for a second round pick. So I don't know exactly like what the market would be, but just to get something is better than the potential of a compensatory pick in a couple of years. And so I think right now they're just in a holding pattern to see, what to what extent there'll be a trade market. And if there is, it makes a lot of sense to do it. And assuming that, it's a tough deal for the player in the sense that you don't get to get in free agency and you don't get to pick your team. And you might have to end up playing on the franchise tag if you can't get a contract agreement. But, my guess is that the teams that would be interested in doing that, there would be at least one where Sam Darnold would feel pretty good about going to. And so I don't know the extent to which that they would try to take care of him in that situation or could take care of him, but that's the consideration as well. So, but the idea, to be extra long-winded, the idea of just franchising him because you can't let him leave because you have to have him back next year, I'm not sure that that's the direction that they're feeling at this moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we were ranking all the potential outcomes, what would be best and worst for the Vikings, playing Sam Darnold on a $41 million franchise tag is probably the worst. You could still go through this again next year and tag and trade him or whatever, but that makes it more restrictive for them and would hurt them in the future because all these free agents that they have to sign, they're going to have to set up all those contracts to hit later. And that's presumably when JJ McCarthy would be playing later on.
Yeah.
But let's talk about the transition tag, though, because when that came up, I was a little surprised to see it because the transition tag is just not used very often. But the idea would be to let Sam Darnold go out, get his offers, and then the Vikings would judge after that whether they want to match an offer or not. I think if they use the transition tag, that would be a tell to us that they at least somewhat want Sam Darnold back, only at their price that they would be okay with matching. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Like there's a lot of times in free agency, and you saw this on Hard Knocks with Saquon Barkley and the Giants, where they say, you know what, go see what you're worth, and then let us know, give us a shot. And the transition tag basically requires the player to give him a shot. Sometimes they do anyway, sometimes they don't. And really the function of the transition tag is just to force the player to do that. And so I don't think there would be any, the harm, I guess, would be like if nobody makes an offer, and then do you rescind or whatever? But it would be a way of, if they felt like he was overpricing himself, and if they wanted him back, first of all, to be their starter next year, to go along with JJ McCarthy, and they felt like the value that he was seeking was way out of line with the market, or something they didn't want to pay, and they weren't sure if he would get that on the market, that would be the strategy to do it. It's not a terrible strategy. There's minimal harm there, but I think that it gets back to that central question of, do they want him to be their starter next year or not? And we have not gotten that answer, publicly, I don't think. And privately, I think that, there's not a lot, like, to me, if they really wanted him back, and maybe they don't want to, tip their hand in negotiations, but there would have been less neutral talk about him publicly even now than there has been. And so, it's really hard to say, with facts behind you, that the Vikings really want Sam Darnold to be their starter next year at this point.
Right. I always think that when it comes to any of these things, trying to read the room with this team is a little bit difficult.
Yeah.
Because Kevin O'Connell is always going to praise, and he should. With Kirk Cousins, we went through this same thing, trying to figure out, well, are they really going to bring back Kirk? I mean, we all thought they were going to draft a quarterback, but are they going to try to use Kirk as their bridge? And then even with Justin Jefferson negotiations, when are they getting done? And then one day, it's just done, kind of out of nowhere. And I feel like that's been the case with just about everything. And there isn't a lot of insider information that we could go, okay, well, they're clearly giving it to this person, or they're clearly giving it to that person. And instead, we all just kind of sit on pins and needles. But you're right. If you're trying to read the tea leaves, there's no quote you can go to and say, oh, wow, KOC definitely wants Darnold back. Yeah. But you also listen to that interview with JJ McCarthy that he did with Rich Eisen, and you go, it certainly doesn't sound like they've told him he's QB1 either. And then it makes you wonder, are they still figuring this out based on price? Because that's kind of what it came down to with Kirk Cousins.
But I don't think they will tell JJ that, even if Darnold leaves. Like, I don't think that they want to, like, I don't think that they have any concerns about him per se, but like, the guy didn't do anything last year, at least on the field. He's got still has a lot of work to do to get his body back and all that sort of thing from the various injuries that he had, the injury that he had last year, and the surgery, and then the shot that he received after that. So I think it would be pretty premature and maybe presumptuous to say that the day that Sam Darnold walks out the door, okay, JJ, you're our guy, because I don't think that they will even think that necessarily, because whether it's Daniel Jones or somebody else like that, I think they have to pair him with somebody like that, and they're really not going to know anytime soon if JJ is ready to beat that guy out, or if they need to put him on a longer timetable just to get him back physically. So, like, the way JJ was talking in that Eisen interview, where he said, I just hope for a fair shot, and there's things above my pay grade and all that, I think that's true. And I think that would be true even the day that if and when Sam walks out the door. And that doesn't mean that we all, will be completely clueless in terms of where it's going to eventually go. He's eventually going to be the starter, but I would think they want him to earn that and show them that he's ready. And no matter how well he was doing at the end of training camp last year, it's a big leap to then project it into after an 8 or 9 month gap there. So, the way I would assume it would play out is they would have him and a veteran and just let him go at it. And I don't know if it would be a straight competition or how it would go, but there certainly, I don't think, would be any public acknowledgement as camp opened or something that JJ McCarthy is QB1.
I think it depends on who that is. I mean, if Daniel Jones was his backup, then it would feel like much more of a competition between the two.
Yeah.
If it's Andy Dalton or something, then JJ McCarthy is very clearly the starting quarterback, right?
We know it won't be Andy Dalton, because I think he just did a new contract the other day. But a player like that, and I see that, and I would argue that if it's an Andy Dalton type guy that they sign, then that would be going out on a limb. I think, especially in an organization where the ownership makes clear that we don't take we don't take steps back. We expect to compete every year. That's why they paid $10 million for Sam Darnold last year, even as they were anticipating a top 10 pick, which is what happened. Maybe that you trust at this point, you trust Kevin O'Connell with whatever quarterback that they choose, and that they can win games with whichever quarterback he chooses to pair with him. But I don't think that they would want to that would be going out on a limb, I think, to pair him with a quarterback at that level.
I don't know about you guys, but I tend to have an impulse buy problem. I'm always signing up for stuff and then forgetting about it, and then I end up getting charged month after month. Well, it turns out that I am not alone. In fact, I just learned that 85% of people have at least one paid subscription going unused each month. Thanks to Rocket Money, though, I now can see all of my subscriptions in one place and cancel the ones that I am not using anymore. And now, folks, I am saving money. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps you lower your bills so you can grow your savings. Rocket Money has over 5 million users that have saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions, reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/Purple Insider. That is rocketmoney.com/Purple Insider today. But if it's not Daniel Jones, and let's say, and I've seen some rumblings in Pittsburgh, Andrew Filipponi, who's a host out there, said that there might be some interest in Daniel Jones from the Steelers. And when I start trying to play the musical chairs game and go, okay, this quarterback goes there, this quarterback goes there, I think Daniel Jones ends up being one of the top 5 best options for these teams that don't have a quarterback. Like, would you rather have Daniel Jones as a reclamation project or Kirk Cousins, who probably can't play football anymore? Yeah. I mean, right? So I'm having a tough time seeing Daniel Jones saying, I'll come back and compete with their darling that they drafted 10th overall, when I could go start for the Steelers or the Browns or some other team that's going to get left out of that party. So then you end up with, what is McCarthy competing with Mac Jones? Is he competing with, I mean, you're going a level down from somebody who's probably just not a starter almost automatically, right?
Yeah. And I thought about that as well. Like, we've all just assumed that it's either going to be Darnold or Daniel Jones. And there's certainly nothing forcing Daniel Jones to do that. And that maybe if it ends up being him, then that gives you a signal that they don't know, that they feel confident that McCarthy's ready, at least on day one. And if it becomes a situation where Daniel Jones plays as well as Sam Darnold, a lot worse problems than that. He's also been a guy that's gotten hurt some too. So you have to take that into consideration as well. But I've thought about that. Like, what if it's not? Like, why are we just assuming that the Vikings can give him the best opportunity? And maybe you could step back as a friend of Daniel Jones or a career advisor of Daniel Jones and saying, look, man, like, that was a rough deal in New York. That was, like, you can see what happens when you're playing in an organization that's not fully functioning or not firing on all cylinders, at least offensively. Pittsburgh's run through a lot of guys. Like, are we sure that Pittsburgh is going to be a place that you can, start writing the second chapter of your career? Are you sure that, whatever other place that could be, that's where you can start writing that? Or do you need to do what Sam Darnold did and, like, take a year to step back? And that's a tough pill to swallow, and it's a short-term loss potentially for a longer-term gain if he plays a little bit for them next year, or is just the backup on a team that's now considered to be in an upper echelon quarterback place, no different than if he was a backup for the Rams or a backup for the 49ers or what have you, and then try to leverage his career after that. It's a tough pill to swallow, and I don't know that he would want to do that, but that would be the argument for him.
No, it certainly would, and it has worked for some other quarterbacks, including Sam Darnold. at the same time. And I do wonder if Carson Wentz ends up back in the conversation for some team after trying the same thing with
Kansas
Kansas
City.
City. At the same time, if Pittsburgh comes calling and they have 75 straight seasons of winning records, I mean, you're probably competing for a playoff spot if you're Daniel Jones. And if you go there on a 1-year contract, make the playoffs, look pretty decent, then someone else might sign you up to a multi-year contract. I think that's probably going to be better for him. But if Pittsburgh isn't calling and it's Cleveland, then maybe you don't want to do that for Cleveland because you could just end up ruining your reputation. So that is a delicate dance for Daniel Jones. But other than Daniel Jones, I don't see a ton of great options for that QB2 position where I would say, oh, yeah, well, it's fine if that guy starts. It's probably fine if Daniel Jones starts the first 5 weeks of the season. It's not fine if it's Mac Jones. It's got to be the right Jones, I think. Now, let me circle back, though, to the Darnold scenario, because I keep thinking about Kevin O'Connell and what he would want. And I can really talk myself into either way. I mean, he won 14 games with Sam Darnold. They built a relationship over a long period of time this season. And also down the stretch, Sam Darnold did a lot of incredible things for this team to even bail out some play calls where he throws the game-winning touchdown in Seattle, beats Kirk Cousins and has the 5-touchdown game, beats the Green Bay Packers. Like, a lot of good things happened over this season. And when you set the bar as high as it is, remember the last time they won 13 games, they dropped down to 7, and the Wilfs were like, yeah, no excuses.
Yeah.
And we were sitting at that table with Mark Wilf when you asked him, like, hey, like, is there some grace here? And they're like, no.
Not in this league. Yeah.
Which seems funny now that they won 14 games and we were asking that question, but they did not extend him. Like, it just tells you their mentality.
Yeah.
And I guess even with the contract extension, I still wonder about that from the head coach of, do I really want to risk this right now? Do I want to have a bigger sample right now? But I could also look at it and go, Sam Darnold melted down in the last 2 games. Time to move on. McCarthy was almost ready to be the starter last year. So why can't he do it again?
Yeah. And I'm almost like I know we're putting it on the owners that they don't accept excuses, but I also, if I could envision a scenario where ownership would say, look, we just gave you the contract extension that you wanted. We did it within days of the end of the season. We made it our top priority, and we're doing it in part because you're really good with quarterbacks. And so now the first thing I have to do as an owner after giving you a contract extension based in large part on your work with quarterbacks is now pay a quarterback, $40 million a year, while I have his eventual successor already there and healthy and ready to go. Like, that you could see where an owner would say, I don't know that we need to do both of those things. Now I just paid you, now go do what I paid you to do and make the next guy really good. And so you could envision it a lot of ways. Like, I don't think the Wilfs dictate things to that extent, but any person who's worked in a place where you're not the boss and there's a boss, you try to feel out what they're comfortable with, what they want, what they don't want, what you'd be going out on a limb by pushing for, and what you wouldn't be. And so I could see where Kevin O'Connell is like, I put a lot of work into Sam Darnold. Like, our whole building put a lot of work into him. Josh McCown did. Our players put a lot of work into getting used to him. And like, now we're, for what? It's all that was for last year. And now there's like no future. Is there really going to be no future benefits from that at all? And so I could see where that would go through his mind a lot. But it's, the other part of that would be like, are we sure that that's the way to go there? And so I don't know, like I could see it a lot of different ways, but there's, as we just to circle back to what we said from the beginning, like, I think we have not gotten any indications that they have decided that this is the guy they want to be their starter. And so until we get that feeling, it's hard to imagine that's where they're going.
I think if JJ McCarthy had been on the field working out maybe in early December and he hadn't had the second procedure, and he hadn't had the weight loss thing that was so apparent on TV and apparent to us when we would see him around the facility, that it would be so much easier to just say, all right, well, this is an easy decision and thanks for the memories and off you go. And the other part of it too, for me, is just the lack of college experience for JJ McCarthy, because if this was a Jaden Daniels or a Michael Penix, I would just say, all right, well, off you go. But when we're talking about somebody that when he came out in the draft, Kevin O'Connell basically looked us in the face and said, don't you dare push for JJ to start before I determine he's ready. We're like,
Yeah.
sorry, okay,
Yeah. Right.
okay.
Yeah.
We're not going to start a quarterback controversy, not just yet,
Yeah.
maybe eventually. But that whole approach to him from O'Connell being, we want to be as careful as possible, and his quote that'll go in his eventual book someday, teams fail quarterbacks more than quarterbacks fail teams, that rings in my head a lot. Otherwise, I think I would be saying, like, this is a pretty easy decision because of the cap benefits and the fact that, we probably saw the best ever version of Sam Darnold. And I also wrote a piece about how this was a strange year because there were 10 teams with 5 wins or fewer, and the Vikings played a lot of them and got a lot of free wins this year, a lot of pumped up statistics for certain people. Probably
it was all a
Sam
mirage.
Darnold.
Okay, it was all a mirage.
That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is when you play the AFC South and you go 4-0, like, that has to be factored in. That's going to be hard to repeat for Sam Darnold to have that type of season and for the Vikings. So normally I would just say, okay, stick to the plan. Like, this is what we wanted all along. Some of us who pushed for them to move on from Kirk Cousins, like, this was the reason. I just don't know how I'm supposed to weigh those other factors with JJ McCarthy.
Yeah. And it's, when you said that, I almost like put it out of my head that last May and June, like, all we were hearing about was the idea that Sam Darnold was there primarily to make sure they didn't have to play JJ McCarthy until he was ready. And so maybe that's the way we need to think about this going into year 2 with JJ, is that whoever they pair with him, they need that person to be good enough to give them credible enough performances until they decide that JJ was ready. I also think that by the end of training camp last year, that they hadn't necessarily decided he was ready for week 1, but they felt pretty strongly that he was a lot closer to being ready than he potentially they might have thought the day after they drafted him. And so the gap from at least a mental standpoint, he did not have far to go to get to that point. And so we'll never know, but like, based on what we were hearing towards the very end of that stretch, would have been really interesting if, maybe around the Jets game or somewhere around there, would JJ McCarthy have been starting to get first team snaps in practice, and where would that have gone at that point? And so, long story short, like, I don't think that they're in that mindset right now of like being worried about putting him out there too early, because they thought he was almost ready almost a full year ago. But so it really becomes more of a physical thing. Like, does he get his body back? And there's every reason to think that he does. And, does he stay healthy and the knee doesn't have any more issues, and that sort of thing. I think, and I feel pretty strongly about believing this, that they are not as worried about ruining him by putting him out too early as they were before they saw anything from him over the course of the summer.
Right. Yeah, there's no question about that. I mean, they couldn't have been higher on his training camp as a whole. And what was most impressive to me was that in OTAs and minicamp, we were going, this kid's going to need a ton of work.
Yeah.
And then he stays in Minnesota, works his butt off. And that's the thing about, putting on the weight and getting back into shape, is that we know that he's going to be here, and we know that he's going to put in the work and the effort to make that happen because we've already seen him do it.
Yeah.
And then he comes to training camp, and 3 weeks into camp, we're going, okay, wow. I mean, he's really running the offense. He's scoring on 2 minutes. They're putting him out against the number 1 defense, and he's not really struggling that much against them. There was a lot of impressive stuff that happened that was confirmed in the preseason game. The preseason game would have meant nothing to me if he had been bad in practice, but it was exactly what it looked like in practice. So all of that is, I think, has to be factored into their trust of starting him. But then they're the only ones with the medical reports. And that also is difficult for us to then figure out, like, is he back to 100%? Do they think he get back to 100%? I still right now am leaning toward JJ McCarthy as the quarterback starting in week 1, but do you want to put odds on it, a percentage on it? Like, how heavily are you leaning in that direction?
51%.
Oh, really? Okay. Wow.
Yeah,
See, that's
is that too high or too low or what?
so does that include all other quarterbacks though? That includes Daniel Jones, that includes
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. So I think so, and so it would be higher if I didn't think there was a decent chance that they'd be signing a Daniel Jones type person. If they're signing an Andy Dalton type person, then it would be higher than that. But I think there's at least a chance that they're going to sign somebody that's going to make us feel like they are not looking to start JJ in week 1. And so we'll see. But of all the possibilities, I think he has the highest percentage of being but I guess I'm being conservative in not giving it too high of percentage.
Maybe I should have framed it as the chances that Sam Darnold are back, because after their press conference, I think with Kwesi adofo-mensah, I think I said to you in the media room, this situation's a little complicated. I think you said to me, I think he's just gone. So
Yeah.
is that changed at all though from your attitude?
No, I still think that if I had to guess what's going to happen, that the likeliest scenario is Darnold walks out of the door, whether it's via franchise trade or whatever, and then somebody else is paired with JJ McCarthy, which accelerates McCarthy's timetable, obviously, but without knowing without having a good feeling about whether it'll be, or good sense right now about whether it'll be a Daniel Jones type or somebody on that next level that you talked about. That's why I'm not giving it a higher percentage that it's McCarthy, because if it's Daniel Jones that they bring back, it's a good chance it's him. But I still think that, like, in the pecking order of who the likeliest guy is to start in week 1, I think it's JJ.
Okay, one more question on this. So that's your guess, your estimate, and the whole scenario. But what do you think is the best idea? Like, what do you think is the best plan for them for next year? Like, do you think that it would be having Darnold back and playing it slow with JJ McCarthy? I feel like I'm alone on an island of people who don't think that that's a terrible thing to happen to the franchise. But do you think it's the best idea to just go with McCarthy and put it in the past?
I think like, to me, like, the best idea, and this is, without all the information, because as you mentioned, the Vikings have some of the medical stuff and all that. Like, I would just be really, and part of it's just like, what's your risk, willingness to be risk averse or to take risks. Like, going into a season all in with a guy who threw 10 passes as a college quarterback and missed his entire, became the first quarterback in the modern draft era, which goes back to 1967, to be a first round pick and miss the whole year because of injury. Like, there's no precedent for somebody making up the amount of time, missed practice time, that JJ McCarthy has had, that we can look back to and saying, oh, this is how it goes, or this is how it sets you back. Like, so I think, like, there's definitely, like, for my level of risk management, like, that's a lot of risk to just go all in with him. So, but I think, like, that's, you do what it takes to get, Daniel Jones, even if that means that you tell him that, like, you'll start training camp as QB1. And if it comes to be that McCarthy is just better, it's obvious to everybody on the field that he's better, then you have Daniel Jones as your backup. And that gives you a pretty good 1-2 punch if JJ falters or if he gets hurt. And that's the other thing, is, like, just as we did learn 2 years ago, if your starting quarterback gets hurt, you don't get the grace in this organization, and that's fine. Like, they're on the record with that. There's no confusion about it. And so the next guy has to be somebody you feel confident you can win with. And the guys that they had 2 years ago, it was, they did not win many of those games, and some of them were directly because of quarterback play. So that would be like what I think is the best overall idea from a team building standpoint for the short and the long term. But we'll see if they agree or not.
I have a unrealistic best scenario, which would be that they sign Darnold to a 3-year deal where the first year's cap hit is $8 million or $7 million, like Baker Mayfield's was last year.
Mm-hmm.
And then they have them compete in camp. And if JJ McCarthy wins that job, then they trade Sam Darnold to a team that needs a quarterback, which is a hard timeline to work on because other teams will have been doing their training camps and preparing with their quarterbacks. But some quarterback always gets hurt around the NFL, and then he would have a multi-year contract. It would be the Sam Bradford situation where he gets beat out by Carson Wentz. They trade Bradford to the Vikings. Someone's quarterback will definitely get hurt, or they will be so wildly unimpressed in camp that they'll want to trade for Darnold, and he would have a really tradable contract. And the other way, if it doesn't work out with McCarthy and he's behind physically, they could play Sam Darnold very cheap, still do all the other stuff in the offseason that they want to do, and then trade him after next year because he's under a contract. But that would have him agreeing to a contract. And that's the hard part. That's where maybe the transition tag would have to come in. And I also think that if someone was willing to pay Kirk Cousins $45 million on the open market after an Achilles injury and one playoff win his entire career, someone's also got to be willing to pay Sam Darnold. So I don't think that's that realistic. Plus, you have to pay signing bonus money and things like that. And that's a lot of cash to hand out for the Wilfs to try to mess with this contract. So it's not very realistic. Yeah. But I also think that it kind of splits the difference that if McCarthy's ready to go, you just go with him and you're not taking on a big cap hit for next year with Sam Darnold.
I just think that the idea of bringing back the guy who was your starter last year, won 14 games, clearly deserves to be a starter somewhere in the league this year, and telling him, welcome back, now go compete with the guy that we want to win the job. Like that's the level of it's beyond, like I've been calling that awkward. Like it's like that's bad vibes, team building, and people like Sam Darnold, and like they're if he was okay with that, then like what level of competitive juice does he have? Like I can't imagine any player would want that. All kinds of like, and again, it's a business, and like they have the right to do exactly what you said, whether it's even if it's like a franchise, or transition tag to bring him back. And they have like there's no rule that says they can't mislead him by sign, either, because that's happened before. But like this is the way they've built this organization and the way that's led to success. That would be certainly a diversion from the way they've done it. But I just think like that first day of training camp, like watching the guy who won 14 games, and it's not like demeaning, but it's just like, well, maybe it would be demeaning to have him have to, share with a guy who had not done anything other than been the number 10 overall pick of the draft before. And so it makes sense on paper, and it makes sense, if you have a certain edge about you and the way you build a team. But like, I just, it's hard for me to imagine that working and
right.
And not having collateral damage.
That's exactly why I called it unrealistic.
Yeah.
There's the other factors make it not make sense, even though it does make sense. So let me ask you about the rest of the roster here. I want you to name me 5 free agents at each position. No, I'm just kidding. But so the big question every year when someone wins the Super Bowl is how far is your franchise away from competing with that team? Now, by regular season record, the answer was, well, they were right there with the Philadelphia Eagles. But then we all watched the NFC Championship and the Super Bowl, and I think we probably had the same reaction. Not so much, right? That the Vikings, in my mind, had the high-end things to match up with the Eagles, the elite receiver, if Darrisaw's healthy, the Jonathan Grenard, the Andrew Van Ginkel, the Blake Cashman, they've got those players. But I think it's the holes in the roster that became super apparent when they played the Los Angeles Rams. How good can they get? Like, let's just assume that they could do whatever they want cap wise. Kwesi Adofo-Mensah worked for 3 years and Rob Brzezinski for 3 years to get this cap to where they had oodles of cap space and into the future as well. And so they can sign whoever they want. They've got the culture, the NFLPA rating, all those things. Even with the free agency and the lack of draft picks, how close can they get to a complete roster through free agency? Because they do have a lot to do here.
Not as close as they need to, like that, whatever that ends up meaning. But like, and I've been pounding the table on this for a while. Like, if you look at, especially if you want to look at the Eagles, and say, what's the big difference? The big difference is they have drafted very well on both lines. Like the guys that were making differences in their lines, and they also some free agents as well, like a Mekhi Becton, but the center, the guard, obviously Lane Johnson, the interior defensive tackles, like that's where you get those guys. Like, and if somebody like that becomes available in free agency, they can afford it, but you're going to massively overpay for that, or at least overpay relative to what you would get him if you drafted him and then convinced him to sign an extension before he hit free agency, which usually happens. And so, maybe Milton Williams is, the Eagles defensive tackle is available. Maybe Trey Smith, the Chiefs guard, is available, and they can sign those type of players. But like especially at positions like, interior offensive line and interior defensive line, it has to come from the draft. And like, it doesn't have to come from the first round necessarily. But like when teams draft those guys and hit on them, they don't usually let them go. And so to me, like that's the difference between the Vikings and the Eagles and a lot of teams. Like, it's just like the strength and the amount of effort and time that they took to build those two lines out through the draft. And so, they're on the right track in terms of Kevin O'Connell acknowledging they need to get better in the inside. And while I think they have some good pieces on the defensive line, it's very obvious they don't have the playmaker type. And I always want to say the Aaron Donald type. Nobody has. There's only one of those guys, but just like somebody who's, Kevin Williams. There's been, so the Vikings have a long history of those kind of players: John Randall, Kevin Williams, like people who single-handedly disrupt. They just don't have, and that's not an insult to anybody that they do have. They just don't have that type of player. And Brian Flores has been able to scheme around it. But they tried to sign Christian Wilkins last year, I think, to be a defensive player like that. So I don't have a ton of confidence that they'll be able to. I think they'll find players that will fit what they're doing. But like the idea that they could just use all this cap money and go out and sign sign better players at all the positions they need to sign players at, it's just not realistic.
Right. I think you would have to land the top player at each position for all the positions of need.
Yeah.
And I follow a lot of other writers around the league. I know you do. And it's like, I don't know how many teams I've seen Oso Digazua's name come up. Like, our team could really use him. Yeah. And Milton Williams and Trey Smith. I'm a little wary of Trey Smith just because of where he comes from, Kansas City. They got rid of the ball really quickly. I know he's a good player, but I think he's going to reset that market. Yeah. And that to me is a little scary, of putting 20-something million into one guard and then asking him to be the complete difference when it's usually about the weak links. The other trouble is that they've drafted some guys that they wanted to develop. Ed Ingram is one of them. It never worked out. They draft Michael Juergens last year, an undersized center that probably would have the same issues as Garrett Bradbury. Like, they need to find real dudes here, not developmental projects, not moving a tackle to guard and then just hoping and praying, not bringing in Jesse Davis to compete with somebody. Like, they need real players. But I do think that they can get to, you're not going to match the Eagles on either one of those spots. But because they do have elite players at edge rusher, at wide receiver, at offensive tackle, like, it's a good start to shore up the weaknesses with the amount of cap space because they haven't had this amount to put into it. So if you're talking about a Kevin Zeitler, a Brandon Sheriff, or I mean, there's a number of other guys that are solid at these positions. I think even being above average as a line in the interior and then having those elite tackles, overall, you can have a top 5, top 7 offensive line. It was really this year about once Darisaw gets hurt, we also saw Brandel's play regress. And then it all sort of comes apart when you have to play against a great team. But I don't think they're crazy, crazy far away from that, even if they don't spend on the biggest guys. I want to know your opinion on 3 players that I think are as beloved in the organization as anybody that you and I have covered here in the last few years, who are free agents and also set to potentially get overpaid. That's Aaron Jones, Cam Bynum, and Byron Murphy Jr. I wrote about this today. Like, how much is chemistry worth? Yeah. How much is character worth? How much is continuity worth? Because if you put on paper Cam Bynum, Byron Murphy Jr., and Aaron Jones against the other free agents, against even a Najee Harris or Rico Dowdle, younger players with less mileage, less injury history, or you go to corner and match up Byron Murphy with some other corners based on his whole history, not just an excellent year. Bynum was pretty good this year. Great dances, great guy in the locker room. But I don't know how much that's worth in comparison to other players that I match up stats for stats and go, this guy's got better numbers. Or Rico Dowdle, who has 1 year of a similar season, but he's 26.
Yeah.
And he has no mileage, right? How do you factor the love of those players with the black and white of it, that if you're paying Byron Murphy Jr. $18 million, that's just a ton for somebody like him?
Yeah, and I guess there's two different categories there. Like Aaron Jones, I think, like, I could be wrong, but like, are we sure that Aaron Jones is going to make a lot of money on free agency this year? Kevin O'Connell was talking about him at the Super Bowl about how he wants him back and reminding everyone. And I went back and looked, and we're talking about this, about how he's always been in a committee type system. And they've given Ty Chandler 2 straight years of having a chance to do that, and it hasn't worked out. And so they've had to go out and get Cam Akers each time. And so I do believe O'Connell that he would like Aaron Jones back as part of a committee. And that might be a pretty good gig for Aaron at this point in his career. This is only the second time I think that he played on every game of a season, and he definitely nursed a lot of injuries and did not have as much juice at the end of the year as he did at the beginning. And so, like, I think there's a lot to be said for him taking like a 20 or 30% snap reduction in exchange for more production, production over the course of a season, if he's truly in a committee type thing. But I also think, like, this draft is extremely deep in running backs. And so to maybe pair him with a rookie would seem like a pretty good idea if they could get him for, somewhat less than the $7 million that they paid him last year. So it's a plus that in his particular case that he had, like, he was, well loved and well regarded, and everybody thought he was great, and he was. And so I think there's something to be said for bringing him back at, as long as he's fully aware that it's not going to be to carry it 250 times, which my guess is he would be okay with that if he put him on a lie detector test. The other 2 guys, like some of it's positional value and how you value the positions they play. Like is Byron Murphy one of the top 5 cornerbacks in the league? I don't know if that's the case. He had the best year of his career last year. He's still very young, and they need somebody to play those spots. So I feel like that should be a priority. I know they did the accounting maneuver that will prevent him from being franchise tagged, but I thought that was, at least in the realm of possibility of franchising him to keep him around. My guess is that he'll be pretty, I think he likes playing in Minnesota, but I don't know that he has the connection that some of the other players feel with it. And so I think he'll be looking for the best offer, and that's where he'll sign. But I think they need to give that some serious thought about, because they're not only, and I know people say, well, they need multiple cornerbacks. They can't spend all their money on one, but they, in if you're spreading out your money on multiple cornerbacks, then maybe they're not going to be very good. That you need a good one too. Cam Bynum, like, I think it's been a tough one because, like, it's been rare when you've had a player who's been that, as vibey as Cam Bynum is. I don't know what the word would be, like, super, friendly guy in the organization, does everything they ask for him, in the community, and does his own stuff in the community too. And, is kind of become a quasi celebrity, as with the dancing and celebrations and all that, and certainly held his own as a player. But I would think that, like, and some of it will depend on what Harrison Smith eventually, hopefully, for their sake, they'll get an idea of what Harrison Smith is doing before they have to make a decision on Cam Bynum, because replacing both safeties in 1 year, like, that's a lot. But I don't know if you, even with all the free agent money you have, if you can spend premium money to keep Cam Bynum. And so I guess that's kind of where I fall on those three guys.
Well, and you have the top safety out there, Javon Holland, was drafted by Brian Flores.
Mm-hmm.
And you could see, I mean, he dipped into the Andrew Van Ginkel and some of the other players he was familiar with, Stephon Gilmore. That worked out pretty well for him in the past. And Holland is a difference maker. And I think with Cam Bynum, there's so many subtleties to love about him. He's a good tackler when he has to come up and make a play. I think he's in the right position all the time, which is hugely valuable. He is available all the time.
Yes.
He is never hurt. And I think that's also a big factor when you're paying somebody. But there's just a number when you start to get to 15 million where you go, that's got to be a game changer to me to be paying him that much. But as you mentioned, all that other stuff does matter, how he relates to his teammates and just the type of person he is. It's the devil, like, he's not a devil at all. He's a wonderful person. And you realize that you bring in somebody else and you go, maybe it's not quite the same as far as being in the locker room. And I think that no team thinks about this more than the Vikings for this sort of delicate environment of what they want, because it is part of their edge in this league, is to have a group of people that really bond together and play for each other. So all of that, I think, is a little bit tricky. Let me just ask you one more, which is in the draft, Daniel Jeremiah's latest mock had the Vikings taken Travion Henderson, the running back from Ohio State. Have we gotten to a point, Kevin, and you and I, we come from an era where people used to draft running backs in the first round all the time, sometimes even number one overall. And then that stopped happening. And then now it's kind of happening again. Is it a terrible idea for the Vikings to draft a first round running back?
I know we mentioned a few minutes ago, this is a very deep draft, but again, they may not have another pick until the bottom of the third. What I think, and this is just my sense of, like, pivoting from the way they've been drafting the past few years, like, when they get to number 24, and if there's not a deal to move down that they like, they got to get a dynamic impact player there. Like, that's what these drafts have been most bereft of, is impact players. And so if they think that, if their football people think that, an Ohio State running back is an impact player, someone who will change the outcome of games for them. I think they had some interest in Jahmyr Gibbs a few years ago. If he had, he got drafted way higher than anybody thought he would, but it's not like, I don't think that they have like these analytical walls that exist, maybe in some other buildings, or people perceive that exists in this building because of Kwesi Adofo-Mensah's background, that says thou shalt not draft a running back in the first round. But, like, to me, like, the focus of that pick, especially if there's not a really good deal to move down at that point, is impact player. And if it's a running back, then I wouldn't criticize it.
Yeah, that's a hard one for me, because I've spent my entire life studying football and analytics and everything else, saying, like, it's just really not a great idea to draft a running back in the first round. And you think about, even Aaron Jones was a fifth rounder. There's plenty of third rounders who have become stars, second rounders who have become stars. And at the same time, last year, the Vikings, when Aaron Jones was on the field, he faced an 8-man box 18% of the time.
Yeah.
And if you have somebody who can make people pay for that, and they did to some extent, but not really. And it's like, if you can make somebody pay for playing those safeties in the parking lot because they're terrified of Justin Jefferson, I think you end up with kind of a Todd Gurley situation when he was great with the Rams, where every swing pass turns into 10 yards. Every, explosive play that you get from that type of talent. TreVeyon Henderson is a special talent, but at the same time, what is the gap between him and the guy you could take in the third round? If it's Caleb Johnson or Cam Scatabo, like what is really the gap between those guys? I think at every other position, we would say the gap is huge between the first rounder and the third rounder, where at running back, I'm not as sure that it is. But like, if they're going to win something, it's going to be because they have an elite offense. Like, that's just always going to be the case. And Brian Flores could give them a top 5 defense. Having an elite offense is usually having everything.
Yeah.
It's having a running game. It's having, the deep passing, the short passing, the offensive guards. It's like, you just have to have everything.
Yeah.
And that's been the missing piece. And the problem is scarcity. Aaron Jones is the best option. It's probably not going to move the needle a ton. You're talking about maybe the 15th best running back at this point. There's no other free agent to move the needle. How do you get a running game that makes people afraid of something else that isn't Justin Jefferson? That would be to draft one high. But I just can't ignore a defensive tackle in this draft.
Yeah.
And I know we're early and, combine's coming up and everything, but the DTs that I'm looking at here are freaks. They're beasts. They're animals.
And that would be, I wouldn't argue with that either. Like, part of what of the decision making at 24 would be like, takes into context all the other players that are around it. I'm just saying, like, if their football people judged the running back to be somebody who could impact them, maybe more than any other of the players that are available, then I wouldn't criticize it. But like, if you're mixing impact and need, then obviously defensive tackle comes up higher there. And they might get very fortunate that in a year when they could really use one, that and that's not a bad place to take one. In the bottom third of the first round, if you're looking at just like positional value. But and maybe I'm just like overreaching my own concerns about the way they've drafted in the past few years and the impact it's going to have in the coming years, by just like focusing on impact. It doesn't matter where, like, it just has to be a plus. Like, it has to hit, whatever position it's going to be. And that's how, some of the good teams are built, is like, just kind of like not using the draft to fill particular holes, and then retroactively creating the value for that player to do that. But it's like, just who are the good players and how do I get them?
Okay. Normally in the regular season, when I know you're busy, I would get you off get you in and out here, but I know you're not doing anything and it's freezing outside. So let me throw one more thing at you, which is just,
I'm going to charge overtime for this one.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. This is worth like 2 appearances in the off season. What's your favorite like NFL off season storyline? Because I think a lot of them that have shown themselves early here, I don't know how they're going to play out. Like, is Matthew Stafford really going to get traded? Some people think he is. I don't know why he would want to do that for a team that was just where they were, one drive away from being in the NFC Championship. The Myles Garrett thing is weird because it's not beneficial to the Browns to trade him unless they sign him to a new contract and then trade him or something. Even Cooper Kupp, he probably just gets cut and signs with the Patriots or something, right? Like, so far, I'm not drawn. T. Higgins is going to be a Bengal somehow.
Yeah.
Is there something that for you kind of can't wait to figure out how it plays out?
Aaron Rodgers to me. And you talked about Daniel Jones in Pittsburgh, and like, Aaron Rodgers in Pittsburgh wouldn't be a terrible thought either. And certainly if there's any coach in the NFL who would be comfortable with I think one of Mike Tomlin's great strengths is, being able to manage all kinds of different people. And you see some of the people that were in Pittsburgh and were relatively on the straight and narrow, and then you see what they became after that when they went elsewhere, it's notable. And so I mean, this guy is one of the best players in the history of football. Honestly, it's certainly one of the best quarterbacks when he was in his prime, and he was in his prime for a very long time. And he's already, much older than most of those guys, long before they retired. And so, like, is he done? Like, is it just going to be this unceremonious end that we've seen with some other players as well, that went on to the Hall of Fame, and where the last couple of years of their careers were not worthy of much mention? But, like, is he going to go somewhere else? And will he take his whole entourage of people and Devontae Adams and Pat McAfee and the rest, or is he going to have to go, if he wants to keep playing? Is he going to have to basically tone all that stuff down? If he does, like, how good will he be? To me, like, that's like, or are we seeing the end of a career that has really been one of the through lines of the past 15, 16 years of or almost 20 years of NFL football? And so that I don't think anybody knows. And that's the other thing, is like, we can make reasonable guesses about all the things you were talking about. And it's really, at this very moment, like, completely up in the air whether he's ever going to play another down in the NFL again.
That just reminded me, that was why I texted you to come on the show.
Yes.
Because you were trolling about the Vikings and Aaron Rodgers, which, the betting markets, they must know what they're doing to trick people, because it was like, the Vikings have the third best odds to bet on getting Aaron Rodgers. They're like, what are you doing here? Why would they have the third? Are you just trying to fool some people? Like, oh, he's going to do the same thing as Favre did.
Yeah.
I mean, that's at 0.0%. So
it's not, I wouldn't put it like 0.0, because everything's, possible, because you just got done saying earlier in the podcast that there's nobody else besides Daniel Jones out there that can be a quarterback here. And so that's one of them. Like, you could make all kinds of very logical points about why it would not be a good idea. And I would probably agree with all of them, except for the fact that it would be really dang fun to cover if that was the case.
I guess, I don't know. 2010 almost killed our friend Judd Zolgad, so I'm not sure that I am ready for that kind of year if Aaron Rodgers was to show up.
But you just hope it would be the 2009 year, not the 2010 year, if Aaron Rodgers comes. So,
based on his most recent performance,
yeah,
I don't know about that. Well, anyway, it should be a fascinating offseason, and we will definitely check in again pretty soon with you, Kevin, after we have decisions and players and contracts and everything to break down. But always good to catch up, and hope you find some stuff to do inside. I like to play chess.
Yeah,
maybe play some chess with the kid. Something like that.
That's possible. It's possible. He's moved on to. I think there's a lot of electronic games that the kids play these days and over the internet, and so. Yeah, and so I'm kind of looped out of those, but we'll keep busy for sure. Spring is right around the corner.
All right, thanks so much, Kevin. Appreciate your time, and we'll talk soon, man. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.